Hello, seventh graders. Last week we had the chance to talk about one of my favorite people in all of Scripture. We got to talk about Abraham. And Abraham, as you might remember, was a man who was called by God to travel into the wilderness. And he traveled there with his whole family, right? He's the first one that we call a patriarch. Well, today I want to talk to you a little bit about how God helped Abraham and what he did for Abraham. So here's what happened. You might remember that God made Abraham a promise, not just any promise, but a covenant promise. Remember the animals, and that God came to him and talked to him between the animals, and then like this was a serious kind of promise. Well, the promise was that he would be the father of nations. In other words, that he was going to have that his lineage, his family was going to be a great, huge family. And indeed, it did become so. But Abraham didn't know that was going to be, he just had to trust God that this was going to happen. And this was hard to do because Abraham didn't have any children. But God visited him with these three visitors that came and saw him and said, "Surely, Abraham, Sarah will bear you a son by the time we come around next year." And we closed off last week with Sarah laughing like I'm going to get pregnant when I'm this old. And yet, sure enough, she did. And when Isaac was born, they named him Isaac, which means laughter. And so now Isaac has a son, the son that he was always promised, the son that from his wife Sarah that he always dreamt of having, right? And of course, as you can imagine, imagine for a minute. You're an older man. You've never had kids. You had Ishmael, but he was been taken from you. And Sarah had never had any children. And all your life, the only thing you really wanted was children. And now you finally have one. Well, you can imagine that Abraham doted on Isaac. He loved that boy like nothing else in the world. Isaac was the most precious thing in the whole universe in Abraham's eyes. And he raised him. He would go out and talk with him, and he taught him everything he knew. And he spent, just like any good dad, but more than any regular good dad, Abraham was an older man and so had much wisdom, much knowledge, and would just spend a lot of time and love with Isaac. So this was a really big deal and very, very, very special moment um, for Abraham. But something happened, and I need you to hear about that story today. You know, not everything works out perfectly. Sometimes terrible things happen. And what God's about to ask of Abraham is about the most challenging thing for us in the modern world to understand. But I need you to understand the ancient world, to understand what God is telling Abraham here. You see, in the ancient world, you had people believed in all sorts of different gods, right? They believed in a god of the sky, god of the earth, and we had some people had different kinds of gods like Zeus and Aphrodite and all sorts of different gods. But all of these gods had one thing in common. They wanted you to do things for them, right? And if you did things for them, then they would do things for you. It was like a deal that people made with these gods. Now, were they real? Well, no, but in their minds, they were real, and that's all that matters, right? So their understanding was, well, if the god of the rain, we need rain because we live in the desert and we need it to grow our food. So what we'll do is we'll give the god of rain something in hopes that he'll take care of us, right? So if we give him something, he'll give us something. It's just a good deal, right? Well, how do you give what does the god of rain want? And how do you give it to him? It's like, here, god of rain. But God of rain doesn't take it because there is no God of rain. So they didn't know how to give the gods' things. So what they would do to try and make this deal is they would break things. They would sacrifice things, right? So for example, if you wanted to think of something really important to you, maybe your cell phone, right? If you have a cell phone, how would you, that's something really valuable to you, how would you give that to the gods? Well, you can't hold it up and have them take it because they won't. There's no way you can send it. You can't put like a stamp on it and say, give to the gods. So what they would do is they would break them. So you imagine taking your phone and putting it out on a rock, taking another rock and smashing it to bits. Well, now nobody can use it. So it's like a gift to the gods because you can't use it. Nobody else can use it. You can't get any money out of it. It's totally a gone thing. So people would give very valuable things to the gods this way. They would sacrifice things. They would sacrifice maybe something that they made, or they could sacrifice all sorts of things. They might sacrifice something really valuable to them, like an animal, right? I mean, if you're a sheep herder, what's the most valuable thing to you? Your sheep. So sacrificing one of those to the gods would be a big sacrifice. Well, the biggest sacrifice you could ever ask for, the thing that we value most in the whole world, are people. And there's no one in the world that we value more than our own children. And so some of the gods, people thought, were asking for people to sacrifice people to them, maybe even their own children. And this was very common in the ancient world, that people would do this because they thought that's what the gods wanted. Now, of course, it isn't, but they didn't know that. And that was all they understood, is that this was the most valuable thing I can give. So surprise, surprise, God asks Abraham for a sacrifice, just like all the other gods. Sometimes afterwards, God put Abraham to the test. I'm reading from the Bible here. And said to him, Abraham, here I am, he replied. Then God said, take your son Isaac, your only one, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah. There, offer him as a burnt offering on one of the heights that I will point out to you. God asks Abraham to sacrifice his son, to kill his son for him. Now, this is tricky because God promised Abraham, like that big promise, God promised Abraham that Isaac was going to be the one through whom he was going to become the father of nations. So what is this? What does Abraham think is going to happen here? He's supposed to kill his son and offer him and burn his body, offer him as a burnt offering to God. Why is God asking this? Why would God ask such a terrible thing of Abraham? But Abraham saddles his donkey, takes two of his servants and his son Isaac, cuts wood for the burnt offering, and starts going where God told him to go. What must have been going through Abraham's mind? What must have he been thinking about all of this time? Was he thinking about all the wonderful memories they had? Was he thinking about how God, was he crying? I bet he was. And I bet Isaac looked at him and said, why are you so upset, Father? What's going on? Isaac must have thought something very, very strange was happening, because I'm certain Abraham was not able to act altogether normal. So up to the mountain he went. Finally, he tells his servants to stay behind, and he has his son Isaac carry all the wood to go up to where they're going to sacrifice him. And they get there, and Isaac says to him, Father, I see we have the wood. I see we're in the right place. But where's the animal we're going to sacrifice? He's used to sacrificing things to God. He's He's used to killing a sheep or something for a big deal. And Abraham says, God himself will provide the sacrifice. He's just trusting God with this. He's just trusting it. Everything's going to be all right. We don't know what's going to happen, but God's never let me down, and I'm just going to do what I'm told. And he goes up to the mountain, and he sets up the fire, and gets it all ready. And he looks at his son. And his son was not a little boy anymore, not a child. He was strong enough to carry all the wood. My son, God will provide the sheep. When they came to the place, he bound his son Isaac and put him on top of the wood on the altar. Now, Abraham's an old man, and Isaac is a young, strong man, the one who carried all the stuff. Do you think that Isaac would have let himself be bound if he didn't trust his dad? Think about that for a minute. This isn't just Abraham's sacrifice. Isaac is saying yes to this too, because Isaac's the strong one here. He can't be taken, Isaac's too big to be taken advantage of at this point. But Isaac too trusts God just like he trusts his dad. He trusts them. And he allows himself to be bound. And he helps his dad help get him up onto the wood. And he's prepared to die. Imagine that for a minute. They're both standing there. They're both ready to do what God called them to do, but neither of them can be happy. I'm sure they're both crying and looking at each other and trying to share this last moment, because Abraham's going to do what God called him to do. He's going to kill his son. And he picks up the knife. And he's ready to do it. And right at that moment, an angel of God stops him. An angel of God stops him and says, Abraham, no. Now I know that you'll do anything for me. Now I know that you are the most trustworthy man in all of the world, because I know how much you love Isaac, and you would not withhold him from me. And he turns around, and there's a ram right behind him. The whole time he's been sitting there, and they never even saw it. He was stuck by his horns in the bushes. And he unwraps Isaac's binds, and they sacrifice the ram. Now you might be asking, why did God do this? Well, let me tell you. You see, every other god in the world wanted sacrifice to show that they were serious. And God asked for the same seriousness to him that everyone else was asking. But there's a difference. And the difference was God said, no, that's not what I want from you. I will never want that from you. I'm not that kind of God. I'm something different than you've ever seen before. You see, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and soon to be Jacob, we'll get to him later, the God of the patriarchs is not like any of the other gods that were worshipped throughout the world, in that he's not invented by people. He's just himself. And he's a God who loves his children and wants their trust and wants their commitment, but does not want their harm. And this is what's different. God is saying, I'm different than anything else you know, Abraham. Now, I want to read you what happens right after this. The angel came back to Abraham from heaven and said, I swear by my very self, an oracle of the Lord, that because you acted as you did, and not withholding from me even your son, your only one, I will bless you and make your descendants as countless as the stars of the sky and the sands of the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the gates of their enemies, and in your descendants all the nations of the earth will find blessing, because you obeyed my command. Abraham's faith is like a light. It shines so bright in a very dark world. And while that's a really scary story, it does show just how committed Abraham really is. Now, Abraham Isaac's become a man, right? He's growing up, and he wants his son to have a wife, just like he does. He wants him to have a Sarah, but he doesn't want. He wants to make sure that his wife is from someone close to them, someone who knows them, and but he doesn't. He's not. He wants to follow God's rules and keep wandering like God told him to. So he goes to his servant. He says, and he tells his servant, "I want you to go back to my hometown, to Ur, and I want you there to find my son a wife. She needs to be. She can't be one of these people from out here in the wilderness. She has to be from my family. Somebody good, somebody solid." And so Abraham's servant goes back to that place. Now, I got to tell you something you might not know. Where do you go to meet pretty girls? Do you know? Well, you can go to school. There's a lot of pretty girls in school. But if you lived in ancient times, there was no school. Well, sometimes people will go and they will meet people at youth groups or at churches, or they'll go to meet people at work, lots of different places, but none of that kind of stuff is there in the ancient times. So where would you go to meet pretty girls? Well, let's think about it. I want you to imagine for a moment that you lived in ancient times. You lived in ancient times. Now, your parents work very hard. Imagine that your mother, she's taking care of the house, and let me tell you, that's a full-time job. Like washing laundry takes hours, right? Making food, like you've got to go get the food and gather the food and get it all together, and you've got to kill the chicken. I mean, it's like a lot of work to run a house, right? And your dad is a hardworking guy too. He's out there with the sheep, out in the fields. Goes out before the sun comes up, doesn't get back before the sun comes down. He's gone all day working, right? Okay. So you're a kid in one of these families. What are you going to do? What do you think is going to happen if you're a boy? Well, chances are, if you're a young man, Dad's going to take you out in the field to go work with him, right? You're going to be working with the sheep all the time. And the young women would probably stay and help mother and work at home, getting all that stuff put together and making sure that the house was taken care of and getting all the food and all that stuff. Now, ladies, you're at home with your mom. Your mom needs somebody to go get water. Now, getting water is a big deal. Right? Like you got to go find a well. They live in the desert. There's no pipes. There's no plumbing. You got to go to the place, get a big jar, fill it up with water, and bring it back home so that people can drink water, right? Or wash their dishes or their clothes or whatever they needed to do. Question. Your mom's working hard. Do you think she's going to go get the water? Not a chance. No way. She's going to tell her daughters to go get the water. Girls, I need some water. Go get some more water while I'm working on this. Man, there's no way she's going to stop what she's doing to go out there and get some water when some of her kids can go do it. So, over time, this kind of becomes a thing. Like all the young ladies go to the well together every day, and they get their water and they bring it all back home for their families. And they do it all the time. So where do you go to meet beautiful girls? Well, you go to the well. That's where you go, because that's where they're going to be going to get the water. And all the guys knew this. Like if you wanted to meet a girl, you'd go to the well. And so Abraham's servant, what he does is he goes to the well. He goes back to that hometown, and he goes to the well. And there, that's where he's pinning his hopes. But we'll have to find out more about this next week. I hope you guys have a beautiful week. I look forward to seeing you. I know we have a short week this week, but just a reminder, so you want to pay attention to your classes next week because they might be on a different day than normal. Just something to think about. All right. God bless you guys. Have a beautiful day.